Meet the Press with Hugh Riminton.
Hello and welcome to Meet the Press. We saw again this past week just how messy major reform can be. A national scheme to improve the lot for the disabled started with absolutely universal support.
I think this is an idea whose time has come. I think it's a necessary and overdue reform.
Well, that was back in April. When it came to funding the first phase, coalition premiers had ideas of their own.
It does need to be funded by the Commonwealth, and that is our position.
Premier Newman wanted Canberra to raise a new federal tax, despite the day before arguing against just that thing.
Frankly, Queenslanders are sick and tired of the Prime Minister putting her hand in their pockets.
Well, the Prime Minister and Tony Abbott are agreed there will be no new tax for disability insurance.
It ought to be possible to fund this important reform out of general revenue.
COAG ended with only Labor jurisdictions, South Australia, Tasmania and the ACT signing up to the trial phase.
I am very disappointed that we have not been able today to strike an agreement with either New South Wales or Victoria or indeed Western Australia.
Well, Victoria was balking at the equivalent cost of just 2 new level crossing upgrades. By Friday, the Premier had cracked. New South Wales quickly followed.
I take the view that this scheme is just too important to play political games with.
But if it's this difficult to get a trial organised, what hope for the scheme itself?
I am very confident because I think everybody knows it's the right thing to do.
Well, the Minister for Families, Community Services, Indigenous Affairs and, importantly, Disability Reform, Jenny Macklin, is our guest today. And later, a month on from the introduction of the carbon tax, and officially it seems there is barely a complaint on price rises. We'll talk to the cop on the beat, the head of the ACCC, Rod Sims. And you can follow the conversation on Twitter at #MeetThePress10. Now here's Melanie Davies with what's making news this Sunday, July the 29th.
Thanks, Hugh. Good morning. Australia has won its first gold medal at the Olympics. The women's 4x100-metre relay team powered through the pool to victory. Alicia Coots, who earlier made the final of the women's butterfly, and Kate Campbell, Melanie Schlanger and Britt Elmsley set a new Olympic record. But it was a disappointing swim for Stephanie Rice, who finished 6th in the women's individual medley, losing her Olympic title and world record. The swimmer broke down in tears after the race.
Obviously, I wanted to do the best job I could, and that was the best I had tonight. And I'm sorry I shouldn't be so emotional, but it's been such a tough preparation. And
Treasurer Wayne Swan has accused Queensland's Campbell Newman of being callous for not supporting the National Disability Insurance Scheme. There's increasing pressure on Mr Newman to back the plan after Liberal-led New South Wales and Victoria agreed to help fund trials. Queensland spends less than any other state on disabled people. And fighting in Syria has intensified, with reports the Assad regime has launched a massive assault on rebels in Aleppo. Troops, tanks and helicopter gunships have moved on the country's largest city to regain control of rebel-run areas. And Hugh, those are the top stories this morning.
Melanie, thank you. And now welcome Jenny Macklin. Minister, good morning.
Thank you.
Let's have a look at what's taken place in the last couple of days. First of all, do you see that as being a great personal victory for the Prime Minister and what was achieved this week?
Well, I don't think it's about a victory for the Prime Minister or me. It's about really a great victory for people with disability. The wonderful thing that's happened this week is it's really shown that people with disability have found their voice and are using that voice loud and clear to say it's time for Australia to have a national disability insurance scheme. And we meet with people all the time who demonstrate to us why it is that it's so necessary. The mother that needs to know that her adult child will have a place to live when she passes away. The cerebral palsy, the girl with cerebral palsy who wants to go to university that can't get there because of a lack of transport, and so the stories go on.
Sure.
So that's what it's about.
So let's look at the wash-up then. New South Wales in the end didn't come up with all the money that you wanted them to produce. Half of the money, in fact, is what they finished up with. How is that going to affect the scheme, the trial phase in the Hunter?
Well, we'll do all the detailed work now with New South Wales and Victoria, but I am pleased that both the Premier seniors have acknowledged that they need to make a contribution.
Sure, but in
so
practice it's going to be smaller in the Hunter than you intended it to be.
Well, let's wait and see. We only, of course, got the details from them very late on Friday.
But the alternative to it being smaller is that you have to tip in more, surely.
Well, that's why we'll do the work starting tomorrow. We've got officials who'll be in Sydney tomorrow working through all the detail with New South Wales, and I want to make sure that we, of course, get it right for people with disability, and I know that the people in the Hunter definitely want that. They're saying we want the first launch of the National Disability Insurance Scheme to be in the Hunter, so let's try and see if we can make that happen.
OK, so let's see what the promise of this insurance scheme for the disabled is. If someone suffers something at 20 which leaves them with major disabilities, will they be covered for life under the NDIS?
Say a person gets a terrible disease in their 20s that really leaves them with a profound disability. Once they are assessed and their needs are worked through, of course they will be able to stay in the disability insurance scheme for their life, and that will be regularly updated to make sure that their needs are being met. But the whole point of the National Disability Insurance Scheme is to really get rid of the terrible lottery that exists at the moment, where people don't know if they're going to have the wheelchair that they need when they grow. I've got a young man living around the corner from me who's now an adult. He needed a new wheelchair. His parents had to fundraise to get that wheelchair. Now, that's what we want to get rid of.
But some element of lottery remains, doesn't it? Because 65 is a cut-off. So if a 64-year-old has some event which leaves him disabled, he'll be covered for life under the NDIS. A 66-year-old having exactly the same event will not be. There is a lottery still, isn't there?
We haven't actually made a decision about that yet. That is what the Productivity Commission recommended, but there are a lot of issues, and exactly the one you have raised is being raised by many people around the country. So I think we've got to work that through.
Sure, so while you're working that through, you cannot therefore know what it might ultimately cost, because you don't know its parameters. So we're still in the dark about how much this massive cost burden, which it will be, the nation taking on the cost burden, but even what it might amount to.
Well, we've certainly done a lot of work on the costings on the basis of the recommendations of the Productivity Commission, and we've had the government actuary and state treasuries, our treasury, go through all that. So we think we've got the numbers pretty clear for that scheme. Now we're going out talking with disability groups, talking with seniors groups, parents and carers, of course, working through all of these issues. The good thing is we'll be able to test a lot of these things on the ground in the launch sites, which is why we want to get up and running next year.
Sure. So Joe Hockey is certainly worried about the cost, because it's highly probable it'll fall to a coalition treasurer to sort through some of these details. Here's what he's had to say.
I'd have to find the money. I wouldn't go down the path of raising expectations on a program as important as this without actually finding the money.
It seems to be an issue, doesn't it? So why don't you, given that this is a multi-parliamentary term reform, why don't you take up the coalition offer of a joint party committee to help to guide this through? Because inevitably the coalition is going to be involved at some stage in the birthing of it.
Well, I think the one thing people with disability don't need is another committee, but what we have...
You asked for committees on climate change, multi-party committees on climate change, on asylum seeker policy. This is so huge. Don't you trust them to be part of a
And of course we already have that with the states and territories through the Council of Australian Governments. So that's been established. We're working with our other colleagues from other political parties at the state and territory level, and of course we know...
But not federally, and it's a federal reform fundamentally. Don't you trust them to do a sincere and decent, honest job about getting through a reform that they say they support?
It's more that we have a number of different committees already. We've got a lot to do. We have made a commitment in our budget. We've made clear our priorities. In a very difficult budget, we found $1 billion. And in fact, if you look at the social reforms that this government has delivered over the last few years, the biggest reform to the pension, major reforms in health and education, a new paid parental leave scheme, we've funded those on the budget, we've shown our priorities, and we've done it responsibly by finding the savings to cover it. So we've got our runs on the board, and we intend to make sure that disability is a priority.
OK, we're going to talk a bit more about the funding when we return with the journos. Now, Ron Tanberg in The Age this week had a view on the disability standoff. Here was his cartoon.
Can't you politicians put aside self-interest and think of the carers?
I don't think you realise how difficult it is.
Welcome back. This is Meet the Press. Our guest is the Disability Reform Minister, Jenny Macklin. And welcome now to our panel, Michelle Grattan from The Age and Raphael Epstein from ABC Radio. Good morning to you both.
Good morning. Ms Macklin, Julia Gillard said last week that the question of long-term funding is going to have to be discussed at some point. But can you guarantee that a Labor government would fund the scheme out of general revenue and that the states would not be asked to meet any of the extra cost of the scheme?
Oh, well, we've certainly demonstrated that we're going to meet our fair share from the budget. We have indicated, and previously the Council of Australian Governments, the Premiers, have agreed that this is an area of shared responsibility. So, of course, we think the funding of it should be shared between the Commonwealth and the states. We do have a lot of work yet to do on what that share should be. The Commonwealth at the moment pays around 30% of the cost of disability care and support. The states pay the rest. We know we have to do more than that, so we've made it clear that we intend to shoulder more of the responsibility, but we do think it's a shared responsibility.
So the states certainly would be in for more than they are paying at the moment, you're saying?
That's our view. Of course, we do acknowledge that this has traditionally been an area of state responsibility where the Commonwealth has helped, but now we want to fix what is a terrible, fragmented system that is not delivering to people with disability or their carers. And I think we all agree that that needs to be done, and so the funding is going to need to be shared.
But didn't the Productivity Commission say that the Commonwealth should bear the extra cost?
No, I know the state premiers like to put it that way, but if you have a look at the detail, they say the Commonwealth should pay and then recoup some inefficient taxes back from the states. You wouldn't be surprised to know that the states have not offered up any taxes to the Commonwealth. So we're saying...
The Productivity Commission did ask you to entrench in legislation the funding formula. Are you anywhere near guaranteeing it? Because people who rely on these services, they want to know it's going to exist in future.
They do, and we're certainly in the process of drafting Commonwealth legislation. I hope to get that legislation into the Parliament as soon as possible. It's important not just for funding, it's important to demonstrate to the Australian people, and especially people with disability and their carers and families, that this legislation will be through the federal parliament as soon as we can get it through.
But isn't that the reason that the Conservative states were so worried about the agreement? If you've got legislation going through that's going to entrench the funding, then they had every right to be cautious on Wednesday, didn't they?
No, this is legislation that will establish the scheme. Sorry if I wasn't clear. So this is legislation that will establish the scheme, and of course we'll continue to talk with the states and territories about the shared funding commitment.
But you still need to entrench the funding model in the legislation to make sure that it exists.
We will eventually need to do that, but in the first instance we need to establish the scheme in Commonwealth legislation, and that's what we'll do. That's exactly what people with disability want us to do. They want to know that this is in legislation, that it's going to be protected, that they will have rights under that legislation, and that's what I intend to deliver.
One of the points of criticism that some of the premiers made was that the administration cost of the trials seemed excessively high. What is the proportion that's the administration cost, and what does that cover? Why is it apparently higher?
Well, of course, we've got a huge number of things to do. Yes, we do have to spend some money on administration, but we're also spending money on the workforce, making sure that the very large workforce we have now grows, because if we're going to see such a big increase in the number of people who get better care Remember, that's what this is all about, better care and support. We're going to need a much, much bigger workforce, so we're spending money on the workforce, getting the non-government sector ready. That's really where a lot of the money is going as well.
This has been perceived as a big win for the Prime Minister, but the polling remains dire for the government. Now, the Rudd supporters, who still remain, believe that the best hope for the party is for the Prime Minister to face facts at some stage and to stand aside for the good of the party. She seemed to be shutting that idea down on Thursday. Here's what she said.
I'm not going to rest until these reforms are bedded in and ready for the long-term future of our country. And I'll certainly be here doing it.
So if she was to step aside for the good of the party, when would be the best time surely to do it? It'd be the end of this year or early next year, wouldn't it?
Well, that matter has been resolved. We resolved it in February, and what I just want to say about this issue is we have seen the sort of leadership that people with disability and carers want to see. That's what we've seen from the Prime Minister this week, her determination to make sure that we deliver a national disability insurance scheme. No other Prime Minister has ever done that. I know everybody now says it's a great idea, but actually no one else has put this forward. No one else has really gone out there and made sure it happened, and no one else has delivered the first $1 billion of our budget into a national disability insurance scheme. The person who's done it is our Prime Minister, and I think people with disability and their carers are very, very glad she's there.
One matter that hasn't been resolved is how the Labor Party best fights the Greens, whether it's really aggressively or a more moderated approach. How much of a threat do you think the Greens are to the Labor Party? How do you fight them? How do you stop them taking your base?
The way I look at my own personal politics, Michelle, is to think about the people who are the most disadvantaged in our community. That's why I'm in the Parliament. And the way I focus my attention is on delivering the pension reforms, delivering Australia's first paid parental leave scheme, most recently the school kids bonus, the increase, for teenagers. These are the things that I'm focused on.
But you can only do that from government. And at the moment, the Greens are eating into your base. Would you support preferencing them last, seeing that they are a danger that you have to see off?
Well, one thing I've never got involved in is any preference discussions, and I don't intend to be that sort of politician. The sort of person I am is a person who does these other things, does the things that parents need. Of course, I'm also responsible for our Closing the Gap strategy, and today, of course, making sure we're delivering a national disability insurance scheme. So that's what I'm concentrating on.
Jenny Macklin, good to have you here today. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
And coming up, are businesses ripping off customers by falsely blaming the carbon tax? You might be surprised by the answer. The ACCC's Rod Sims will be joining us. And from the What Were They Thinking file, in case you missed it, here's what happens when a Premier decides to play Spin the Bottle on FM radio.
Whoever it lands on, Barry has to kiss. So, you know, obviously we know how that works.
Poor old Barry's just going to cop it one way or another.
And right now thinking, why did I walk in here? And it has to be on the lips.
Now give it a good, it's got to go round a couple of times, I'd say. 1, 2, 3. Oh, the dip! The dip! He dipped her!
Wow, very soft lips.
Don't forget that.
Welcome back. This is Meet the Press. As head of the ACCC, Rod Sims wields enormous powers with the potential to deliver multi-million-dollar penalties to Australian companies. Now, he's watching business behaviour in the first month of the carbon tax and joins us now. Good morning.
Good morning, Hugh.
You've been counting complaints and it turns out there haven't been that many.
That's right. They've been less than we expected. I think that's probably a function of all the focus on the carbon tax, all the compliance work we've done, and I think businesses are largely doing the right thing.
Did you expect it to be higher? Have you got a previous experience you can compare it to?
Look, we haven't. We were working out amongst ourselves what we thought it would be, but I think it's fair to say it is a lot less than we expected. Yes, we were geared up for various overflow and all the rest of it, but it's been a lot less than we expected. Yes.
It might have been because the actual cost hasn't flowed through yet. If a lot of the power bills haven't flowed through the businesses yet, maybe there hasn't been an impact yet.
Oh, look, I think Well, I mean, we were always concerned that on July 1, people would try and use the focus on it to get price increases, and I think we saw a company try and do that. I think it will be, this issue will be around for 6-9 months as the cost increases flow through. That's exactly right. But still, I think so far, we've done a lot of compliance work with companies, and I think that's paid off. So we're pretty pleased at the moment.
So do you think businesses really have been somewhat intimidated by the pre-publicity and they think, well, not worth the try on? Or do you think there'll be more complaints later?
I think the complaints will continue on, but I don't think companies have been intimidated. I mean, what this was about was making sure they didn't use the focus on the carbon price to dupe consumers into accepting a higher price than otherwise, and I think they haven't done that. But companies have been quite happily mentioning the carbon price where it affects their prices, in energy, refrigerant gases, landfill, and all that's perfectly legitimate. Our role is just to make sure they don't dupe consumers, and as I say, so far so good.
Now, Tony Abbott has made many clear commitments that he would get rid of the carbon tax if he's elected. The polls suggest that he probably will be. He does see a role for you, though. Here's what he said the day after the carbon tax began.
The ACCC will have the job of ensuring that people aren't being ripped off, and that when the carbon tax goes off, costs appropriately reduce.
So is it your job to ensure that costs go down if the carbon tax is taken off?
It's our job to enforce the law. It's the government's job to set the law, and we'll do our job exactly in that way, quite happily, in enforcing whatever laws are in place.
But you don't expect to be in businesses saying, hang on a minute, you've got to bring your prices down, the carbon taxes come on, off they come, we'll penalise you if you don't?
We don't have any price control powers right across the board, which sometimes confuses people, but what we do have is powers in relation to consumers being misled, and that's actually, as we've seen in the carbon price issue, quite a subtly powerful role, because when businesses are adjusting their prices, they're also communicating with customers, and that's where a role can come in. But if the government wants to give us further powers, we'll happily do what the law prescribes.
Can I ask you about another competition issue? The government is soon considering competition in the media industry in the terms of a public interest test. Do you feel that competition is adequate or too restricted in media?
Michelle, as you know, our role is to make sure there's not a substantial lessening of competition with any merger. In addition to our powers under the Competition Act, there's always been other media rules in terms of limitations on how much print, radio, TV you can have. This debate's been going on a long time. I think it's appropriately left to the politicians to have that debate.
Is it too hard for you to ensure competition? Would it help if the legislation was beefed up a little?
Well, as I say, there's already other laws in there in terms of what you can own in print, TV and newspapers, and how much you can own in a city in the country.
Do you need more?
Look, for what we do, no. Our role is quite comfortable, substantial lessening of competition, and we can play that role in media and in every other sector.
Just coming back to the complaints issue, you've not had too many on carbon, but where are the consumer complaints at the moment? What are people concerned about?
We always get a lot of complaints about scams, and that's a big role for us to make sure people aren't getting ripped off by scams, and of course the internet just increases the chances for those.
Have they gone up?
They have a little, yes, they have a little, and the type of them has changed a bit, Michelle. We get a lot of complaints in relation to the communications market and the energy market, because they're such complex products, and there's a great chance of people getting misled. And of course there's always the complaints in relation to supermarkets and petrol. They are our perennials.
Are you satisfied that consumers know that you exist sufficiently so that if they've got a complaint they immediately think, hang on, this isn't right, I'm going to the ACCC? Do you need more publicity, a publicity budget even, to get out there so that people know that you're their friend?
Look, I think they do know we exist. I mean, they have a range of views about us. There's some in the community think we're too intrusive, and some in the community think we are a toothless tiger sometimes. But I think the most people understand what our roles are in relation to consumer law and competition law. So no, I mean, look,
So you're not asking for more money to publicise what you do?
Not more money for publicising. We can always do more for enforcement. But we have a big role to communicate. I mean, I see it as one of my roles to be out there communicating what we do, what we don't do, and inviting people to complain where they think there's been a breach of the law.
Well, thank you for coming in and communicating with us this morning, Rod Sims. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
And thanks also to our journos, Raphael, Michelle, thank you. A transcript and a replay will be on our website and also on our Facebook page. So till next week, goodbye.